Hi guys, so today I want to explain all about the Civil War, what caused it, and I'm just going to explain very briefly, or as briefly as I can. Please note that this isn't a very in-depth video. I'm not going to be reviewing like many dates or many battles. I'm just going to be giving an overview of it. So now that we have that out of the way, let's begin. And I think the best place to start would be from the very beginning. So originally, the U.S. was part of Great Britain, and it seceded from Great Britain, and it won its independence. After that, it expanded westward, and this is what they got. The entire U.S. is pretty much the same, except for Russia and Hawaii, which wasn't part of it at the time. The only thing, they just didn't have the states in the middle of the U.S. in place yet. But there was a big problem that had been emerging in the U.S., and that was the issue of slavery. See, the North from Pennsylvania and New Jersey onward, at the very beginning, had outlawed slavery, but the South, from Delaware, from the south of Delaware, had prohibited. Sorry, not prohibited. Had allowed it, and they became reliant on it because you see, the North, they were more industrial than agricultural, since their climate wasn't very well suited to farm. They became more industrial, and as a result, they didn't have a reliance on slavery, and they saw it as cruel and wrong. The South, their climate was much better, and it was perfect for farming, and as a result, they did farm, and they did allow slavery, since with slavery, you could they could pluck plants and crops, and you could sell it. You could just have free labor, and as a result, they kind of became economically reliant on slavery. And as it expanded westward, so did the problem of slavery. A lot of compromises were made that kind of just kicked the bucket down the road. A lot more slave states and anti-slave states were added. Pretty much a lot of these states were, anti-slavery, and these states were pro-slavery. And, it was a very delicate balance, and, a lot of the nation knew that the issue of slavery was very important and had to be dealt with, but, the South wanted to make it constitutional, but the North wanted to ban it. And there's also a second big issue that most people don't talk about, federal rights versus state rights. So, the North thought that federal rights was much more powerful than state rights, and the South thought that state rights were more powerful than federal rights. So the North thought that if the government thought that slavery wasn't legal, that's how it should be. If the government votes that slavery is illegal, it should be outlawed everywhere. The South, however, they disagreed. They said that state rights were more powerful than federal rights, and that a law should only be a law if the states also agree. So then, what started the whole entire Civil War is the election of Abraham Lincoln. Many people know him as the Great Emancipator, but he didn't actually come with intent to free slaves. His intention actually was to outlaw slave trade, just trading slaves, and he thought that slavery would naturally die out from that. But the South still didn't like it, and they were very nervous, and they didn't like the fact that Abraham Lincoln was elected president, because many southern states didn't even allow the citizens to vote for him, but he still won anyways. So as a result, they started to secede. So the first state to secede from the Union was South Carolina, and the last state, if I'm correct, was North Carolina. So all of these states seceded from the Union because they wanted slavery to remain a thing, and they were nervous that Abraham Lincoln would outlaw it. And now it is important to note that not all states not all slave states seceded from the Union. We have states like Missouri, Kentucky, Maryland, and Delaware. They were all slave states, and also West Virginia. They were all slave states, but they weren't willing to secede from the Union, so they remained with the Union. Oh, and it's also important to note that West Virginia did secede from Virginia when they seceded from the Union. So Virginia, it's kind of a little complicated, but Virginia seceded from the Union, but this part of Virginia wanted to remain, so they seceded from Virginia to form the state of West Virginia, and they voted to remain in the Union, and they were made a state. But anyways, once they seceded from the Union, a war started, the Civil War. And most people thought that it'd be very brief because the North had more people, and not only that, they had, since they were more industrial than agricultural, they had more technology, and they had more stuff like railroads. So they had better ways of transportation, and as a result, most people thought that it'd last maybe a month, but it didn't. It lasted years, and the reason is because the South had much better leaders than the North. The South had leaders like Robert E. Lee, who was a very brilliant leader, and the North did not have good leaders. They had very timid and shy leaders who didn't want to engage in much battle. They were always very scared, and as a result, it dragged the war along far longer than it really should have. But once these states seceded from the Union, Abraham Lincoln started the war. And remember, the war wasn't originally about slavery. It was about secession. And the North said it was illegal secession, and that's what the war was about. So they, like I said before, the North used many leaders that were very ineffective and often lost to the South, despite the fact that the North should have won pretty easily in the very beginning. Not pretty easily, but it should have been much more easier than it really was. The South had many good leaders, and the South really was, more in the defensive position. The North sent attacks down to the South, but the South would just held much more of a defensive position than offensive. Of course, the South did launch a couple of attacks in the North, particularly in Maryland. That's one of the biggest places where attacks were made. And the South, and then the North would have to hold defensive positions. But the South, soon the tables started to turn. The North got better leaders, and it wasn't looking good for the South. So they hoped that if they couldn't win the war militarily, they could win it by kind of stalling. And what I mean by that is that they were hoping that Lincoln wouldn't be reelected. You see, the war was pretty unpopular in the North, and Lincoln was also pretty unpopular since they weren't really winning yet. They weren't making many decisive battles, and as a result, they hoped that when the elections came around, the South hoped that they'd be replaced with a Southern sympathizer who would allow the Confederacy to secede. And maybe Robert E. Lee thought that the best way to do that is to launch an invasion of Pennsylvania, more specifically Gettysburg, and launch an attack there. But it wasn't. It was probably a good idea had it worked, but it didn't work, and that was a Northern victory. And as a result, the war became more popular, and as a result, Lincoln was reelected. And after that, they defeated the South, as you all know. And recently, like around that time, around the time of the Battle of Gettysburg, he made the Emancipation Proclamation, and that's when he freed all slaves in the South. Now, remember, you have to remember this because States that had slaves like Delaware, Maryland, West Virginia, Kentucky, and Missouri, those slaves were not freed. They remained in bondage. Only the states in the Confederacy, like Texas, Florida, North Carolina, Georgia, Tennessee, like states like that, they were freed. So they didn't free the slaves that they had authority over, but they freed the slaves that they didn't have authority over. And they did that so that these states wouldn't secede from the Union. They didn't want that to happen. Yeah, but eventually the North got leaders like one big one is General Ulysses S. Grant. And he would later become the president of the United States of America. But he was a very good leader, and eventually the North looked like it was going to win for the North. Another good fighter was Sherman. He was a very good leader, and one of the most famous things about him is the March to Georgia, or I think, right, Sherman's March to Georgia, if I'm not mistaken, where he kind of marched through the South and kind of burned everything along the way. He burned many cities, and honestly, he was one of the reasons why the war was so deadly. This is the most deadliest war in American history, more deadly than World War I and World War II combined, I think, if I'm not mistaken, for them. And I think this is the reason why they often had large casualties. But the thing is, the North could replace their losses. They had much more people. The South could not. And eventually, the South gave up. They said, all right, you win. And as a result, they became part of the U.S. again, of the Union. They were admitted into the, forced back into the Union, and slavery was outlawed completely after that. Not just from the the Confederate States, but also from states like West Virginia, Kentucky, and Missouri. Like, it was completely outlawed, thankfully, and the states complied, and slavery was completely outlawed. Yeah, that's pretty much it for this video. That's the Civil War, very briefly. If you enjoyed this video, consider liking and subscribing for more content. And also, leave a comment telling me what I should do for my next video. And that's it. Bye.